in this season of Love Gives, we thought it would be important and valuable for us to spend some time in what is often referred to as the love chapter in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And it's called the love chapter for good reason. 8 times in 13 verses, the word love is found. And there's another 8 times when it is referred to as it, but we know it's clearly referring to love. So 16 times in 13 verses, the Apostle Paul is writing to some people and talking about love. And as we try to understand today why love is best, it's helpful for us to know that this is a whole letter that's 16 chapters long, and the Apostle Paul is writing to people that he cares about, and they love God, and they have a lot of gifts of God, and they have a lot of insight from God, and they're doing a lot of things for God, but a lot of this letter is a challenge. We might even use the word rebuke, because in all the things that they are doing, you know what they've left out? They've left out love. And so chapter 13 for us is often read at weddings, but the Apostle Paul did not sit down and write this letter to be read at weddings. He was writing to some people who were using the gifts of God to boast about themselves or to envy other people and the gifts that they had, but they were leaving love out of the equation. Do you agree with me that love songs have been songs written about a particular aspect of life in a vastly superior way and in such a greater way than any other aspect of life? Somebody estimated 80 to 90% of all songs are love songs. And would you also agree that when we sing about love in those songs, we sing about it in ways that we don't sing about anything else? We sing about it in eternal terms till the sun doesn't shine anymore. And we sing about it in these overarching life kind of ways. And that's not even factoring God into the equation. I looked at some song lyrics, and there were many to choose from. I'm going to show you a couple that even helps us to understand that there's something that the human heart instinctively or inherently just understands. There's something different here, and Paul is going to help us understand what that something is today. But as we jump into that, look at some of these lyrics, and they lead us in the direction of saying, we know on some level, whether we factor God in or not, there's something different here. There's something special. Here's Eric Clapton. How many times must I say I love you before you finally understand? Won't you be my forever woman? I'll try to be your forever man. We sing about it in eternal terms. Marvin Gaye, darling, forever, forever. You can break my heart forever if you want to. I'll play the part of a fool just to be with you forever, forever. And even back to my childhood days, Led Zeppelin, of all people. If the sun refused to shine, I would still be loving you. If the mountains crumble into the sea, there will still be you and me. Why do we sing about it in those kind of, even if the world ends kind of ways? Here's somebody, I don't know if you've heard of him, Taylor Swift, I don't know. It's a name that could be a guy, could be a girl, I don't know, you can figure it out. But Taylor says, for the moment I knew cosmic love. Even greeting cards take us in this direction. You know, I will love you until the end of time. What is it that the human heart seems to know and understand about love that is different? And the Apostle Paul has taken these folks that he cares about to task about ways in which they're leaving love out of the equation. And as he begins chapter 13, we began by looking at how he describes love. And a lot of the descriptions here are things he is saying are not reality in your life. This is what love looks like, but it doesn't look like it in you. What kind of ways did he talk about it? Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. In earlier places in this letter, he has said, you know what you're doing? You're impatient with one another. You're unkind. You're envying one another. You're boasting and you're proud. That's not what love is. That's not what love is like. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. That's what it's like. Well, what does it do? And we looked at this last week. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And then Paul is going to wrap up this whole section by telling us that love is what lasts. love is eternal. The love of God is eternal. And in doing that, we're going to walk through this section either just sort of phrase by phrase or verse by verse so that we understand exactly how he's building all of this. And we're going to wrap that up with what this means to us and how we can make this real. So here's what he says in the last section. Love never fails. Now, I think those of us who have lived in this broken world of ours go, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. My experience would tell me that I can love somebody, and maybe it begins that way, but it does not always end that way. And many of us have experienced some pain on the other side of giving our love and ourselves to somebody else. But what he's talking about here is not the human experience. What he's talking about is the kind of love that God gives to us, the kind of love that we were made for. So what does it mean that love never fails? And that word is used a couple ways back 2,000 years ago. And the Apostle Paul was tapping into that meaning. And one of the understandings of that day was that fail was used for a bad actor who gets booed and hissed off stage. That never happens to love, not to God's love. And the other way it's used is for a flower. And we all know that flowers come into bloom, but we discover they don't bloom forever, right? And so the picture of what fail might look like looks like something like this. That it comes into full bloom, but then what begins to happen? It begins to fade, and the petals begin to drop, and before you know it, there really is nothing left, and that is fail. And the Apostle Paul is telling us that the love that God has for us never does that. That never happens. Love endures. Love lasts. Love will continue on and on. But look at the rest of this verse. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. And where there is knowledge, it will pass away. And you notice he identifies 3 gifts in this verse. And the gifts that are given there, he says they're temporary. They're not going to last forever. There's a gift of prophecy. What is that? It is a God-given ability to reveal God's truth. And that is here for a time and for a purpose. But one day, it will not be here anymore. It's temporary. There's the gift of tongues. What is that? A God-given ability to speak a language that you did not learn so that you can communicate the things of God. And it's here for a time, but it's not going to be here forever. What is knowledge? A God-given ability to speak into situations, and especially, this is in the context of people. It is God's wisdom applied to life so that others are benefited and blessed by it. And it seems like the Corinthians, to whom this letter was written, were very enamored by those gifts. They were the spectacular, sort of the shiny gifts, right? Many of these would put them in front of other people. They were often speaking gifts, and they were drawn to them. And Paul is telling us, hey, you're grabbing on to things that are temporary. Notice what he says. Prophecies will cease. Tongues will be stilled. Knowledge will pass away. And what you've done is you prioritize those temporary things over the thing that will not fail. What is that? Love never fails. And so he's calling them out about what they prioritized. That you have valued something that has a time and a place, but it is not here forever. There's another day coming when those things will no longer be necessary. And we say, well, why aren't those things going to be necessary? And hold that thought, because he's getting there. So those gifts are temporary. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. So not only is he saying those gifts are temporary, they're also partial. They're not complete. They do not give us the entire picture. And that doesn't mean that they are untrue. It just means that they are not complete. Now, there are things in our lives that we know are, partial. That doesn't mean they're untrue, but they're not complete. Let me give you an example. So when we come to mathematics, right, we can ask the question, so what is mathematics? Okay, well, mathematics is 1 + 1 = 2, and 2 + 2 = 4, right? That's mathematics, but it's not complete, right? I don't know about you. I got lost in mathematics when they started putting letters where numbers were supposed to be, and the whole thing kind of got away from me and spun out of control. And 2 + 2 = 4 is a long way from E = mc², right? And Albert Einstein and all that he unpacked. That was mathematics as well. It's just at a whole different level. And so Paul says, now, here and now, even the gift of prophecy, revealing God's truth, is in part. It is not complete. And so it kind of creates this picture that what we can see and know here and now, there's a partial picture of that. But it's not the full picture. It doesn't mean that what we see is untrue. It just means that it's not complete. And then he says this, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. So he's talking about another day. Now it's temporary and now it's partial. One day there's going to be completeness. What is that? The word there, and this is one of those times where understanding the word that was used originally, this was originally written in Greek, and it's the word teleon. Helps us to understand something about this. It's really difficult to translate that word teleon into just one English word. That's why some of the translations of this verse says, when fullness comes. Others say when perfection comes. Here it says when completeness comes. What is that? What is the teleon? And you may recognize, we get our word telescope from teleon. And what it has is this idea of what we are aiming at. A telescope is to be able to see far, and we aim it at things. But it also has this idea of understanding the design, the reason, the aim for something. So Paul, what are you saying? That we're here in a land of temporary and partial things, but one day completeness comes. What does that mean? This means there's another day coming. And that day will make things eternally different than they are now in all the right ways. Let me see if I can illustrate it for you this way. A couple days ago, I saw a video of a man in Australia who was walking on the beach, and he came upon a beached dolphin. It had washed up on the shore, and my guess is you've seen videos like this. Either a whale gets washed up or orcas get washed up onto the beach, and then people try, to get them back into the water, because here you see this beautiful animal, and you can know and understand that it was designed for a certain kind of environment, but it was not to be washed up on the beach. And so they can flap their powerful tails, and what does it do? Nothing. All it does is spray some sand up in the air. And you recognize that if they do not get to where they were made to be, that eventually they're going to die. They're not going to exist there forever. And here's what the Apostle Paul is saying. That where we live here and now and who we are, that we are in a place of incompleteness. That we are not in the environment that was meant to be our teleon, our aim, our design. And all the way back at the beginning of the Bible, here's what it tells us, that humanity, men and women, were created to be in a relationship with God. But that relationship was broken, and we were separated from God. And because of that, it's like our souls have been beached. And we have these longings inside of our heart because in some way we know and understand we were created for something different that we do not experience here in this world. And if you've ever experienced the hunger and longing in your soul for things that you cannot find here in this world, Paul's saying, there's another day coming. And yeah, we are in that place where we do not experience those realities. But through the power and by the grace of God, there's a day coming when the completeness will come. And it's as if God walks up on the beach and picks up our beach souls and takes us back and puts us into the environment for which we were made. C.S. Lewis, about 100 years ago, was an atheist turned follower of Jesus, brilliant man. And he said this along these lines of thought. He says, if there's a longing in my heart that does not find a correspondence, a reality here in this world, it should indicate to me that I was made for another world, for another place. And Paul's saying that time and that place is coming. That completeness is coming when people will be, through the grace and power of God, through a relationship with God. It's as if Jesus is picking us up off the beach by his coming to rescue us, and he's carrying us toward that place. And one day there will be full and final and completeness. That our souls will experience what we do not know here in this world. You ever had the longing to live forever? But we recognize that here in this world, our time is short. But there's another day coming. We long for unconditional love, but often those desires are frustrated here, and they come to the end of itself because of us, because of the brokenness of this world. And we long for fullness and purpose and meaning, and maybe we have glimpses here and there, but Paul says one day, the teleon, the full and final aim, design, reason for which we were made, will be our experience for all time. And so what we see in part now, he's saying one day completeness will come, and all the picture will be filled in, and the environment into which we will be placed will be what we were made for. It's not always going to be like this. And there is hope in him and with him. And then he goes on to give a couple illustrations of what he's talking about. And again, he's kind of calling out the Corinthians here. When I was a child, I talked as a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. You know, he's telling the Corinthians, grow up. Grow up. You're taking the temporary and partial things and you're elevating them to ultimate things. And what you're doing in that is even turning them so that you boast about what you do have and you envy what you don't have. And he's saying, but it isn't about any of that. And it certainly isn't about you. But it is about you being on a journey that will ultimately conclude with God taking you to the place that you were meant to be. So grow up. And then he gives another illustration. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Now, all of us, I think one thing we had in common, we woke up this morning, we looked in a mirror, we saw the damage from the night before, and we did something about it, right? And that's how we all got here. Now, the mirrors that we saw are a pretty accurate reflection of who we are and everything that comes along with it, but it was a little bit different for them. They did not have glass like we have glass today, and so their mirrors were different. Here's an image of one. They were made out of metal. And it was metal that was not, corroded like it is there, because that's what happens to metal. But they would polish these metal mirrors, and you could look into it, and you could get some kind of reflection of yourself. But as you can imagine, it was a distorted image. And the word here is that the image that we get, the reflection that we get our word enigma from it, like a mystery. We're even a riddle to ourselves. That we don't even fully understand ourselves here and now. For now, we see in part. Just like a reflection in a mirror, the image is somewhat distorted. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And do you see the contrast between here and now and there and then? And how it is going to be different. It will not always be this way. And what he talks about being the reality now is that we see this distorted image, but then one day we will see face to face. What is he talking about? This is incredible. If you put your hope and trust in Jesus, did you know one day you will look into his face? You will look into the face of God who has come to your rescue. And who is carrying you right now off the beach where your soul has been stranded, and he is working toward putting you in the place you were made for. And there are some spiritual trains of thought and teachings that say one day, our goal is that individuality in ourselves is the enemy, and one day we will just become part of this collective peace, and we will lose ourselves ultimately. That's not what the Bible says. In fact, the Bible says the exact opposite. That one day in that place, you will have a face, you will have an identity, you will be a person. You will not lose yourself in nothingness. You will be found. And you will see the one who knows you just the way that you are here and now. And he loves the real you, the broken you. But one day he's going to take you home, and in that day, you will know about him in ways that are only temporary and partial here and now. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but the best is yet to come. But you will see him face to face. And there will be a community of true people who are fully and finally in the place that they were made for. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And here's the incredible thing, right? He's been talking about temporary gifts. Faith and hope are also temporary. They're good and they're true and they're important here and now. We need faith so that we can take hold of a relationship with God. We need faith so we can understand that it's God's grace, His undeserved favor that has come to our rescue. And God has told us enough so that we can belong to Him. But one day, faith will become sight. And we won't need to trust anymore because it'll all be there in front of us. And hope won't be necessary. We need hope here and now. What does hope mean? We often use it in the context of saying wishful thinking. Gee, I hope so. But in the Bible, the word hope is a confident assurance about the future. And we need that. Will all the promises of God fully and finally be realized? And we need that now because we can't see over the horizon, not the horizon of the end of our lives. And so we need hope. But one day, all those things will not be a confident assurance. They will be the reality, moment by moment. And so even faith and hope, they have a time and a place. But the greatest of those is love. Why? Love never fails. Love will endure. Love lasts. Why is that? Because it is one of the intrinsic characteristics of the nature of God. It's not the only thing that God is, but we are told God is love. Doesn't just mean that God is loving and He has love. Those are true. But He is love. God doesn't need faith. God doesn't need hope. God is love. And so it is what will last. It is what will endure. And so what are we invited to do with this? We're called to put love first. When it comes to a community like this or our individual lives as we follow after Jesus, the defining characteristic of a community or our lives should be love. Now again, it's not the only characteristic, but it should be the defining characteristic. And this shouldn't surprise us because if you know anything about the words of Jesus, this is what He said to His disciples on the night before He was betrayed, nailed to a cross the next day. This is how the whole world will know that you are my disciples. This is how the world will know that you belong to me. This is how the world will know that you're following after me, that you have love for one another. Interesting, He didn't say, hey, it'll be marked by your tenure. Right? There's a lot of different ideas of what does it mean to have an identifying mark, even of maturity, of belonging to God. Sometimes we think, well, it's tenure. How long you been around? And say that. He doesn't even say they will know that you are my followers by the depth of understanding about theology. And I think that's a really important thing. But it's not the greatest thing. The defining characteristic is love. Because love lasts. And when we lead out with love, why, it's as if things begin to change even in this broken, partial, temporary place of ours. Can I give you an example of that just from Thursday? We hosted a meal here for folks on Thanksgiving. It was for folks who are part of Washington Heights who didn't have family in the area come and just kind of be surrogate family for a day. And also, one of our pastors, Pastor Andrew, and some others, they got some vans here, went down to some of the local shelters and brought some people here as well. About 150 people from those shelters came and enjoyed that meal. And somebody was telling me this, who was helping serve that day. They said, you could tell, who was coming from the shelter. They were dressed rough, and you could just tell life has not been kind for whatever reason. And as they came in, there was not a lot of eye contact. There was not a lot of, hey, thank you, and hey, it's good to see you, and hello, how are you? Not a lot of that. But then the meal happened, but on the way out, things changed. And there was eye contact, and there was thanks, and there was connection, and there were tears. Why is that? It's because Love lasts, and love is the ultimate characteristic of what it means to follow after Jesus. So put love first. And let's not make the mistake a priority like the folks in Corinth did, who were drawn to all the flashy and shiny stuff. Like a kid on Christmas Day who unwraps the sparkly paper, grabs a gift, and then maybe by the next day is kind of finished with that. There's something that lasts, something that will endure. So put love first. You know what else it helps us to do? It helps us to endure. Because in this temporary and partial time, there are some things that are just plain not good. But love helps us to remember, because it's our closest link to eternity, that there's another day coming. And completeness is on its way. And right now, it's like Jesus is carrying us from the beach, and one day we'll be put into the environment for which we were made, so we can endure. And it can also make us courageous. Because what do we got to fear? And what do we got to lose when the one who has come to our rescue says, oh, it's coming. And in him we can be a part of it. So put love first. Why? Because love lasts. And could it be that all the love songs that have been written about it are like this faint echo of the true love song that has been sung from the beginning of time? And even the Led Zeppelins of the world understand that there is something special about this, and something different, and something for which the heart of humanity was made. And it's true. But it's found in a specific place, and really in a specific face. The one who has come to your rescue. That ultimately it's found in a relationship with Jesus. Would you bow your heads together with me? And just before I pray, could it be that you've never taken that step of putting your faith and trust in Jesus? But my guess is you can relate to the longings of the human soul that just seem to go so often unfulfilled. That we don't find the fullness and completeness of what our hearts ache for on some days. And I would encourage you to turn in the direction of the God who says, yeah, those longings, they're real. And they can be fully and finally satisfied in him. So is it time maybe to step across that line of faith and trust, to put your hope and your trust in Jesus, believing that he came and stood in your place, just like mine, and paid for your sin, just like mine, and rose again from the dead to conquer sin and death, just as he did for me, and to commit yourself to follow after him. And Lord Jesus, on this day, I pray that you would give us this image of what is to come, and we live in the land that is partial. But God, would you secure and cement this image into our hearts so that day by day we can know that we belong to the one for whom we were made. And there's a day coming by your power and by your grace we can experience the teleon, all that we were designed for, all that our hearts have been aiming for, even if we didn't realize it, and all the things that we tried to maybe fill in other ways. It ultimately points to you. And so thank you for who you are and all that you have accomplished on our behalf. And God, as a community and as individuals who seek to follow after you, would you help us to make love the defining characteristic, just as you called us to do. Lead us in that direction, God, for your name's sake. We ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.